a bit like, who's the guy that makes stuff out of everything?
MacGyver.
MacGyver. My wife's like a MacGyver. But even MacGyver needs the stuff. So she'd give me the shopping list of things and I would scour veterinary shops, dental supply shops, the equivalent of Bunnings, and try to get anything vaguely close. And so that's what they do. So this here is a typical street. This is in a fairly big town. I counted them. These are all the people that have died from that area. So there was 425 of those when we were there last year. They've got so many dead soldiers to honour now. They now put 4 on each frame because there's just not enough space. You know, 425. Imagine Queen Street with 425 of these. And what's fascinating is people get used to this, just like you get used to wearing your watch. People get used to this. They walk past and they're licking their ice block and enjoying the sunshine. And we're just going there looking at all the young men or young women or whatever. So it's there's signs of war everywhere. This is a cemetery in Lviv, and it's just for soldiers from Lviv that have died in the war, and they keep having to expand and expand and expand to make more room for all the soldiers that are dead just from that city. Now this is interesting. This is 9 o'clock in the morning, so it's traffic time, and you can see these two people. They've got out of their car in the middle of the road, and so has everybody else. At 9 o'clock, everybody stops, wherever you are, and you just spend a minute's silence. So you want to know what it's like living in a country at war, then that's part of what it looks like too. And then after everyone stops. We have to flick through these. I'll give you Anita's talk. Of course, Anita couldn't be here because we've got short notice for going back in October. So we've both got bucket loads of work to prepare. And so she just could not squeeze in tonight, as well as all the preparation for going back. One of the universities want her to have an accredited course because they like so much of what she does that they want to roll it out nationally, and so she ups the ante. So this is a person that's all they've got on their hand. You can see, okay, they've just got one thumb. The other hand's totally missing, by the way. So you don't see that here. This one here is a burnt hand, and now it's been scarred. And what's happening is the scar grows. So already you can only do this a little bit, but soon you won't even be able to move them in or out because they just don't know how to treat things properly. And so this is my wife's world, teaching them how do you deal with that. And of course a lot of people with injured hands, they don't have any legs anymore. So whatever you can get for them out of their hand means a lot. They're trying to change how people perceive someone with an artificial leg. So what a lot of the soldiers have done, just this calendar year as far as I know, they put soft toys on their artificial legs and their artificial limbs because kids are going to stare. And they didn't want the kids to stare and be afraid. So they put these little, this is a capybara, if you're from South America, it's just a big rodent, and all these little soft toys just to help the kids not be afraid of them, you know. So it's a really nice touch. My wife's going back this year to work at one particular place called Superhumans. They're superhumans, of course they might have 2 artificial legs and an artificial arm, and they build on that. These are not people that you should think go on the rubbish heap. These are people that have got a lot to contribute. That's them learning out how to make splints. Sometimes it looks like, well, there's not much wrong with that hand apart from its missing bits. But this finger, because it wasn't treated properly, is sticking like that. And the other hand's had a stroke. So when he goes to pick something up, the finger's always in the way. So even though it looks like a relatively minor thing to have your finger stuck up, if that's your only hand, it's a real big deal. So you should teach them about, well, how do you get it straight? We have to move on. Sometimes you talk to big groups, small groups, and we really have to move on. Oh, this guy's interesting. So this here, this is a toe that's been stuck onto a hand. So if you've got a few fingers but you don't have your thumb, it's really tough. And they're just starting this sort of advanced surgery where they take a bit of toe off the guy's foot and they're sticking it on the remnant of a thumb bone way down here, and that's this guy here. And if we had time, what he's doing is he's pumping his hand up and down after surgery to try and help it heal. This eyeball's missing, and he doesn't have the other arm. So this is what war looks like. It's very sad.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Have a nice way for your home. Thank you.
I get very teary when there's just some sign of love. All my wife gave her was a little cheap kangaroo pin. She was crying. You know? Really, really lovely people. Very easy to get along with. And that's my wife's talk. So we'll move on now to my talk. Good idea to write down any questions that you might have, and just let me pick this up. And how about maybe some of you have a question about what my wife does? Yes, please.
What's the most common cause of like lost hands?
Sure, yeah, the usual blast wounds. So last night, well, one night ago in Ukraine, 805 drones were sent by Russia. 14 missiles were sent. Many times there's about 400 to 500 troop invasions across the border, and they can drop over 1,100 glide bombs, all in the one night. Yeah. So it's quite a busy war. They talk about noisy nights. Did you have a noisy night? Ring up somebody. And so that's just like, you know, we have euphemisms, you know, did he kick the bucket? They say, oh, it was a noisy night. Yeah. So good question. So a lot of it's blast injuries and soldiers. They call them defenders, they don't call them soldiers. They're just trying to defend the country. Anybody else?
We're very interested in the work of the leprosy mission and the work that they do with nerves and so forth. Any correlation?
Yeah, you're an interesting story. So there was a bricklayer in England a long time ago, and God wanted him to do more. So he became really what they call now the grandfather of hand surgery. He wanted to do more, so he went to help with the people with leprosy, and he was the first person to talk about or to do surgery that involved putting bits of you that still work into places where the leprosy has stopped that other bit working. So leprosy basically stops nerves talking to their target, which might be a patch of skin or might be a muscle. So he was all about, well, hang on, there's this other muscle that you don't need so much. Maybe we can take it and put it up there and you can still move your thumb. You might have lost some other movement because we took something. We took the robbed Peter to pay Paul. So that guy, Brand, he's a grandfather. So he's still acknowledged now. So the leprosy mission, probably not many hand surgeons now would know, their grandfather, they know his name, but they don't realise, well, he did all that because he was working with leprosy, and he did that because he loved Jesus, and he was just a bricklayer to start with. So, great story. This is just a map to help you once again get orientated. You can see little Ukraine here. Some of you are from the Philippines, way over here, and this massive country called Russia.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
What sort of distance are we talking about? Are we talking about thousands of kilometres wide?
Okay.
How high?
Yeah, so when I wanted to go back from the east to see Anita and Lviv, it was an overnight train trip and 3/4, almost 2 overnight trips by train. So a long way. But I did stop in the daytime. So probably looking at about 2,000 kilometres, I would say, from east to west. That's a rough guess. The trains are interesting. It's the black of night, and your app's going off telling you there's an alarm in your area, because you can choose tell the app which area you're in, and then it goes off and you think, well, I'm in a train, can't do anything. And then the train stops, and you think, oh, we're in the middle of a paddock. You really have to stop. Usually much harder to hit a moving target. So usually you never find out why the train stopped for an hour before you keep going. But it is a bit unnerving. We'll talk about that later. I'll just see where this is all at. I can see that. Excuse me for a minute. I'll just put this down. Okay, so are you all understanding what I'm saying? Getting able to hear okay? Okay. So this is our first time in Ukraine. We typically didn't get met by anybody. It wasn't until Nita would turn up at a hospital at the front door, so we would try and find hotels and move around. So this is just outside the front of our hotel. This is only 8.5 kilometres from the middle of the CBD of Kiev. So Kiev's their capital city, both in terms of politics and business. It's like a combination of Canberra, Melbourne and Sydney, if you like, without anything bad from Canberra in it. And so the Russian tanks got within 8.5 kilometres of the smack in the middle of Kiev during the February 2022 invasion. And this is, some of you have watched World War II movies, these are things to stop tanks. And then this is a billboard, you'd see these billboards. That's a billboard trying to encourage you to join a particular battalion. And if you join that battalion, you think you're going to be using a chainsaw, you're going to be driving big, fast trucks, you're going to be doing some welding, and you think, oh, well, that sounds better than being in a trench. I can join that and I'll probably end up there. And so instead of being pulled off the street, because that's what happens, usually there'd be 3 policemen with machine guns and 2 or 3 army guys, and they go around the street and they stop you and they say, why are you here? And that's usually it. If you don't have any good reason, you don't get to go home. You go with them. And then you go with them to a recruiting centre. You usually get to make 1 phone call then, and then you go to training. Training is sometimes 12 weeks, and then you're at the front line. So men hide sometimes, which is very dysfunctional, creates a whole world of problems. Yeah. But a lot of men volunteered, especially early days. So yeah, it's a bit different when you're used to seeing billboards here. You see some really old stuff. This is a little bit of the city of Kiev. You can see it's quite big. So although there's bombs going off, the chance of your little patch of dirt, your apartment building being hit is a bit minimised because there's hundreds and hundreds of other apartment buildings they might have chosen to hit that night. I want to explain about why there's so much concern from Ukrainians about being occupied by Russians. Some people don't know much about World War II history. They don't know much about history at all, and that's fine, it's not their fault. So I'll just go through some things. The Ukrainians are certain if they don't die fighting, they will die anyhow. That'll be the end of them. So a young woman like Rhapsody here, she knows that if she doesn't help her man, then that's the end of it. You know, she will fight, she'll pick up a gun. There's no point thinking she can have a normal life there, especially if she's a Christian, and especially if she's a Protestant Christian, or especially if she wants to speak Ukrainian, or especially if she wants to have children and they grow up with an understanding of what Ukraine was and that it even existed, etc., etc. So this is from the Holodomor. Put your hand up if you've heard of the Holodomor. Yeah, 1, 2, yeah. So most of us have heard of the Holocaust. Well, the Holodomor is what happened in Ukraine. So in the space of 1 year, Russia, which was the controller of the USSR, instigated a deliberate starvation campaign, and the minimum statistic is 3.7 million Ukrainians were starved to death, just in 1932 to 1933. So some of you will think, well, gee, my grandmother was a little girl then. And so a lot of them are remembering, well, gee, that actually wasn't that long ago. And now the same nationality, the same nation, Russia, is coming again. It was only my grandmother's generation that they killed 3.7 million of us because they didn't like the word Ukraine. It's not meant to be something that exists. So this is a very famous statue. It depicted a little girl trying to get some grain. Old technology, new technology, straw broom versus plastic broom. This is outside one of the Holodomor museums. They were still growing grain there, but the grain was out of bounds. So if you like, all the grain fields were like locked up. But they weren't locked up physically, they were locked up because they would routinely raid people's homes to make sure they had absolutely no way of cooking it or grinding it, and that they didn't hide any. So there were gangs and gangs and gangs going round and round and round, always looking, you know, maybe Rhapsody or may have even had a daughter by then. Maybe she'd had a few grains, or where'd you get those grains from? Well, it fell off a truck. In one case, a little girl, about 8 years old, she found some grain on the road, but she was punished because the grain had fallen off a government truck, so she was stealing from the government. So that was the era that a lot of the Ukrainians grew up in. And so that's why they're not in any doubt about what the future would look like. These are mass graves. And this rings bells for them now, because when Russia came in February 2022, what did they start seeing? Photos of mass graves. So it's a reminder, oh, this is all coming back. What did Russia do? It started bombing their ports. It's cutting off all the electricity. It's blowing up dams, it's blowing up electricity generating places. That's just dead children on the street. This is from the Holodomor. And so they're just people would be dying on the street and other people walking by. But there are churches there. And so this is a church. It looks perhaps like a modern church. What makes a good church?
Music.
Music. There's even something more important now. If you walk into the church and the first thing you see is a diesel generator, you know it's a good church, because then they can keep playing the music when the power goes out. So last year there was lots and lots of power outages. Basically in a big city, 4 hours off as a minimum in a block, sometimes 5.5, and 4 hours on, supposedly. And so there's diesel generators everywhere, and different parts of the different blocks would have their power. So we were in there, power suddenly went off, and the singers didn't miss a beat. They just kept singing, and then within about, I reckon, less than 90 seconds, the diesel generator was up, and the lights were on. So yeah, that's life. I teach in Bible seminaries, we might come back to that. And I know I'm running out of time. I'm wondering what I'm doing here. I'm teaching about anxiety and PTSD, moral injury, forgiving your enemies, loving your enemies. So these are challenging messages. I'm told I'm the only one there teaching them about how do you love people who are crossing your borders and raping your daughters and blowing up your children's hospitals. What does that look like? How does anyone forgive someone who's done a heinous crime? You know, if you've been tortured or raped, how do you go about forgiving? You know, Jesus used the present tense. He said, forgive your enemies, love your enemies. He didn't say love those that used to be your enemy. I think a lot of people put some past tense verbs in there, but he says, love your enemies, pray for your persecutors. It's all present tense. And interestingly enough, this is something that's digestible. So what I'm saying is, with God's Holy Spirit, I'm amazed that 99% of people with God's Holy Spirit can see that there's a way that they can move forward. Hate is a very destructive thing. And when you think about it, it's 3.5 years. At a recent ceasefire talks, well, not recent, back in June, the lead Russian negotiator sat down in front of the lead Ukrainian negotiator, and the Russian said, how long can you fight this war for? We fought Sweden for 21 years. Think you can keep this up for 7 years? 11 years? 13? Of course the answer is no. So there's not going to be a ceasefire, but the war could go for a long time. So if you think, well, it's okay for me to hate because, you know, it's just a flash in the pan. No, you're going to be hating for years and years and years. And that's not what Jesus wants us to do. That's not the way to live your life. You know, when I grew up reading the Bible about love your enemies, well, who was my enemy? Well, it was a guy that threw some rocks at me or hit me or punched me up or something. But it was nothing like this. Most of the time it's insults, it's adults, it's mostly someone slighted you or made you feel like an imbecile. But in this country, loving your enemies is just like it was back then. When Jesus was telling people to love their enemies, who were their enemies? Well, they're under occupation, if I remember rightly. They weren't Russians, they were Romans. And they were doing genocide, mass enslavement, mass torture, urban annihilation. That's what the Romans did. So, yeah, and here's an interesting thing. You know how the Christian communities wrote letters to each other after the apostles died, the first 12 disciples died. And we've got some of these letters. We call them the church fathers. You know what the most common Bible verse was? It wasn't John 3:16. It was love your enemies, pray for your persecutors. That's the most popular verse in the surviving manuscripts. So isn't that fascinating? So I talk a lot about these mental health conditions, what they are. Some people think they're from Satan. Some people think that Christians should never be anxious about anything. Some Christians are pacifists. They don't believe you should resist at all. Other Christians, they call them militarists. They believe you should actually try to stop the Russians invading. So it's just like any Christian group of communities, there's different viewpoints. But they need a lot of help in basic understanding about, well, what's the difference between hate and anger? We're told not to hate, but certainly we're told that don't let your anger last beyond the sun going down. Does that mean there's some anger that's okay to have for 12 hours? Jesus got angry. So these are the things I talk about. And then especially this big process. They don't have a whole cupboard full of stories of people forgiving anybody for anything. The guy in the blue shirt there, if you heard a preacher and he started to preach about someone who forgave somebody in terrible circumstances, what name would pop into your head? A woman.
Corey.
Yeah, Corrie ten Boom. If I hear another preacher mention Corrie ten Boom as the example of forgiving your enemy, I'd be so disappointed. Because there's lots of Corrie ten Booms, you know. The problem with always using stories from the 1940s is people don't think anybody else has done it since the 1940s. And in Ukraine, they've not even heard of Corrie ten Boom. So this is, they've come from a Soviet background. They only got free of the USSR in '91. They're quite a new country. And so I've written a book now for them. And it's called Hating and Forgiving, Violent Crime and Combat Killing. It's because when I gave these talks and still give these talks in Ukraine, they wanted something in writing. So 150,000 words later, it's going through the second phase of editing now. I got my first endorsement today from a guy who used to be a paratrooper and then became a theologian. So that was very exciting news today. And there's a Ukrainian publisher who's very keen to publish it. And later on I'll put up a QR code so that if you want to, you can donate to help that process of getting the book from English into Ukrainian going. This book, when it was turned into Ukrainian, it was all Ukrainian money. But things are getting harder. You know, when we were there last year, if there was 300 or 270 drones in a night, we thought that was a really noisy night. But now 700s, then 800s, maybe a night with only 600s, it's very full, very noisy. So Keith, you're a pastor. Okay, this could be you and your wife just 5 years ago. And your wife's dressed like that, wearing a bulletproof vest and a helmet, because you're going to Kherson. And you might do this on the weekend. You might have a very young daughter, a teenager, maybe a couple, and you leave your home in the relative safety. You fill up a van with antibiotics, with camouflage nets that the church have made twice as big as this whole room combined. Maybe a few extra truck tyres for the soldiers, sanitary pads for the women, Bibles, your guitar,